Okay, so this is going to act as my uh, final course reflection for my Urban Education 2 class. So, the first question that was posed in this is: what have you learned in this course about, for instance, definitions of urban, as well as student, family, and community assets or funds of knowledge? And how can these be leveraged in and beyond your future classroom? And I think for me, like a big takeaway from this course in regards to like these definitions and these different groups that play a role in urban education is kind of like keeping in the back of my mind that I'm in when I operate within an urban school setting, I'm a bit of an outsider. And instead of trying to put my judgments and my kind of like value system and take those and place them upon like my students or their families, um, I should be curious and trying to figure out kind of how systems that function in urban communities, how they actually do function, and see kind of like the benefits from these systems, whether they are like state sponsored or kind of like community action plans, and to try to like look at them through a lens of that involves less judgment. Those are things that I think of now when I think of, like urban, that definition. I think urban kind of constitutes often a series of systems that operate without the aid of the state in order to try to reproduce any outcome that is beneficial. And while I think sometimes those outcomes, unfortunately, also kind of perpetuate different power structures that kind of self-replicate due to things like cultural hegemony, which I kind of beat that drum a lot in this class. I feel like, but I think it's really important to know. Um, those are kind of things that I want to incorporate into my classes and see if maybe I can use them um, to maybe kind of attack those systems, the state systems that I think force these um, non-state systems to even like have to be. So, in question two, what ideas, skills, and or dispositions do you want to hold on to from the class? I mean, it's funny because like my political views, I think align really well with a lot of like the curriculum of the class. Um, like I see a lot of the issues in urban communities as just being systemic issues of capitalist structures. I think that they exist the way they exist by design, because I think that the system wants to keep replicating um, poor people being poor people who work for rich people, whether they are people of color or not. Because I think urban usually is used in that context, like a very racialized lens. I see it more in an economic lens. I see it as sort of these compacted places where workers are forced to replicate these systems. Um, with that being said, I would like to hold on to sort of like this idea that if I enter into this world, which I want to, that I'm not here to like save anybody. I see it more as a way to organize. I see my role as more of one where I can organize people in their own communities, especially as a social studies teacher. So like one of the dispositions that I do want to bring into my classrooms based on this is um, ways teaching kids ways in which they can impact their community, whether it is through voting for school board, voting at school board votes, like voting for your mayor, your superintendent, your local sheriff, things like that that really do impact urban communities. I think more so than presidential elections where whether you're Democrat or Republican, both sides want to keep down the working poor. So I think that that's something I want to bring in is just I think Christopher Emdin for all of the faults in his book. One of the greatest assets is talking about community mobilization, whether it's just getting kids involved with each other, and then taking that and kind of replicating that in a political sense. So that's like a skill or disposition that I want to hold on to from this class, is looking at the world through a little bit more of a micro lens than a macro lens. Although both obviously are important in the case of urban education. So for number 3, how do you plan to carry forth your learnings from this class into your career or your life as a classroom teacher? I guess I've kind of been touching on this in all of my answers, but um, I think, before I started this journey, like almost 5 years ago, of going to school and becoming a teacher, um, I saw urban communities from like a deficit standpoint. And when I got into education, when I started deciding I wanted to get into education, and I said I would love to work in an urban environment, I really saw it from the perspective of a Michelle Pfeiffer Dangerous Minds, like let's get them out of the slums kind of viewpoint. And through like just my own evolution, political evolution, I now see it as more of like, what can I do to support these communities in breaking free from these structures? How can I be kind of like a backroom player? I want to I want to help shape students who are going to not get out of these communities, but actually bring change to them. Whether it's on the streets, in protest, or, at school board meetings, or, district attorneys, anything. So I really want that for my students. And, I think with that being said, one of the biggest learnings that I want to take from this class is like just remembering that I need to meet them where they are and not expecting them to come to me, because I am the adult in the room. It's my responsibility to meet my children. It's not their responsibility to meet me. And it's their world. These microcosms are theirs. And if I want to become part of them, it's a very selective process, I think, more so than we like to believe in the ivory towers of Rutgers and academia. And I hope to be selected, by these communities, to be part of them. And as far as like what stands out as my major achievements and one of my most proud of, for myself, I would say one thing that I'm most proud of through this journey has really been, I think, just being open to my own and being self-critical of stances and beliefs that I had previously. I think it's really important to be able to admit when you're wrong, or to be willing to say like, hey, I used to think that based on the data that I had, but now I have new data and I am going to discard that belief in favor of one that is more supported by that data. I think that political beliefs, ideology, it should kind of be rooted in that kind of scientific discourse. Um, so that's something that I think that I've done a really good job of, and I feel really proud of. With that being said, something that I'm least proud of, I think that one's tough. I think I'm least proud of, I find myself being really critical sometimes of prior viewpoints that I had. When I worked in sales and when I was working in car sales, I had a very different view of society, of like these big systems. So I think when I reflect back on them, sometimes I feel like a sense of shame around that. Just feeling like I was sort of like undermining what I now think needs to be supported. Um, so that's something that like I struggle with. And there were times in the classroom in my student teaching where I felt it come up. Um, sometimes I would see a student doing poorly, and I would ask, like, what's going on at home, or where are their parents? Why aren't they parenting them? And I would have to kind of correct myself and just remember that, like, my experience and every student's experience is different, especially at home. And just because some students don't have that opportunity to be like parented in the way that other students are. And I think I need to always bring it back to like who I believe is truly responsible for the inequities in this world, and it's not these kids' parents. I think that they, unfortunately, are put in a system where they replicate it over and over again because the system